All right, so back at home, in just a few hours, all 100 senators are set to officially begin hearing the evidence in the impeachment trial against former President Trump. The Senate voted yesterday that the trial is indeed constitutional, and they do have the authority to proceed, even if Mr. Trump is no longer in office. On day one, defense and House impeachment managers wasted no time making their cases.
The transition of power is always the most dangerous moment for democracies. Every historian will tell you that. We just saw it in the most astonishing way. We lived through it.
Trading liberty for security. It's about suggesting that it is a good idea that we give up those liberties that we have so long fought for. Let's understand why we are really here. We are really here because the majority in the House of Representatives does not want to face Donald Trump as a political rival in the future.
All right, so Molly Hooper was following the first day of the impeachment trial. She's here with us now. So that was kind of a little snapshot, but I don't think it even comes close to what it was like to watch the whole thing from beginning to end, Molly. What an emotional roller coaster. It's so intense, that opening video that brought us all back to the day. I almost felt it more intensely than I did when I was watching it unfold, because it was sort of put together in a timeline to, you know, the president's attorneys, casters, opening arguments were sort of meandering, and there was kind of confusion. I wasn't sure exactly, you know, what he was doing. So the quality of the presentation aside, let's just drill down into the arguments. What did we hear from the impeachment managers and from Donald Trump's attorneys in terms of the arguments that they were presenting yesterday?
Okay, easy. Let me just break it down. You're right. Yesterday was long, and yesterday's arguments were supposed to be strictly on whether it is constitutional to impeach a president of the United States who is no longer in office. And the Democrats came out and said, listen, you're a president from the time you take office on January 20th until the time you leave office on January 19th. 4 years later, ultimately. And the incitement of insurrection that the Democrats are charging former President Trump with occurred on January 6th. So there's no January, quote unquote, exception. That's a term that we heard a lot yesterday from Democrats, and a term I'm sure we're going to hear in the next few days. But essentially they're saying that if a high crime and misdemeanor is committed while the president is in office, that person is impeachable, even if that person is out of office. And they put up some evidence showing that there have been administration officials that were impeached after they left office, because it's not just removal of office, it's the barring and disqualification from holding a future office. And that's really what the Democrats were focusing on. Republicans, the Trump team, came back and said, listen, you can't remove a president who is not in office. I mean, this is the opposite argument, right? And they found a few constitutional scholars to back that up, sort of. And one interesting argument that Bruce Castor made was, listen, now that former President Trump is a private citizen, he still has to obey the laws. And because he's not president, the DOJ can prosecute him as a private citizen for high crimes and misdemeanors that were committed when in office. So if, in fact, there is a case to prosecute the former president, then the DOJ should move forward and do it. And then if the president were to be convicted, or the former president were to be convicted, the Senate and the House could come back and essentially bar him from holding office in the future under the 14th Amendment. So that's really the cruxes of those two arguments.
So both groups of attorneys used visual aids, if you will, used video, but House Democrats showed senators a 13-minute video of the riot that they produced. And it sort of showed video of what the president was saying at the rally on January 6th, the conversations in the crowd, what was happening outside the Capitol with what was happening inside the Capitol, all along a timeline. So you could see things as they were happening sort of at the same time, simultaneously. It was really, really moving, at least as a viewer. How did senators react during and after seeing that video?
Well, I think they were clearly moved. I mean, according to the pool reports with the one or two reporters who actually were in the chamber, there was utter silence, and that is a chamber where you can hear senators coughing, sneezing, rustling papers. None of that during that 13-minute video. And I think that what was so striking about the video is that the timeline as it was presented really cut back to Mitch McConnell that day and what was going on when he was making his speech on the Senate floor, spliced in with real-time video from the rioters who were taking over the Capitol. And then you saw Senator Lankford, the Republican who was basically shut down on the floor because, as a staffer, you could overhear on the microphone, protesters are in the Capitol. And, remember, and I keep making this point, impeachment is a political tool. And these individuals, the 100 senators, are technically jurors because they're standing in judgment of the former president, but they're also witnesses. All 100 of those senators were in the chamber that day. They could hear the banging on the doors. They were evacuated to a secure location. So this is something that really hits home for a lot of those people. And I believe it was Republican Senator Roy Blunt. I saw a report of him saying it was the first time that he had actually seen that long of a video really show the timeline of how this progressed. And I think that it moved a lot of members in that chamber.
Moved emotionally, but not necessarily when it came to their vote, except for one Republican senator, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana. I want to play what he had to say during the break after the hearing wrapped up.
President Trump's team were disorganized. They did everything they could but to talk about the question at hand. And when they talked about it, they kind of glided over it, almost as if they were embarrassed of their arguments. Now, if I'm an impartial juror, and one side's doing a great job, and the other side's doing a terrible job on the issue at hand, as an impartial juror, I'm going to vote for the side that did the good job.
Okay, so he was the only sort of new Republican that voted that, in fact, proceeding was constitutional. No other Republicans did switch their vote. I don't know what to make of that. Is that impressive that at least one Republican switched their vote, or is it kind of disappointing?
I think that on that
because
question
many Republicans, I should say, sorry, Molly, because a number of Republicans sort of agreed with his assessment of the two sets of arguments, that the impeachment managers were much more successful at delivering their argument.
Well, here's why I think the managers were more successful. When they came out with that video, they weren't necessarily presenting the constitutional case in favor of impeachment. They were making an emotional case and really going right to the heart of the matter, why Donald Trump was impeached. And I think that that's what really caught the defense team, the former president's defense team, off guard, a little flat-footed, because the Trump team was prepared to come out and argue the constitutional points. They weren't prepared necessarily to argue the full matter of the case, which is what we heard essentially from Bruce Castor, who came up and said, we had to switch things up because we thought the prosecutors did such a great job that we kind of had to change our strategy a little bit because we thought they were going to argue strictly the constitutional case. So I think that's why you saw that disorganization. But the Democratic House managers came out, pulled no punches. They really went for the heartstrings. And I think that on the issue of whether it's constitutional or not, that vote, the fact that one Republican changed his vote is significant, because you have to remember most of the individuals in that chamber, they're all attorneys, many of them former prosecutors or defense litigators. And so they know the Constitution very well and are taking this very seriously, obviously. But, moving forward, we'll see how this plays out in terms of whether the president should be convicted now that we're past the constitutional question. I'm not sure that 17 Republican senators will join that train, but you never know at this point. Who knows what the House managers intend to introduce in the next coming hours and days.
Yeah, you got a trial with jury members who were also sort of victims at the scene of a crime. You don't know how that's going to impact people, right? Molly, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the second day of the president's impeachment trial is set to begin later at noon Eastern.